Australia gained its independence from the British Empire on the 1st of January 1901. Since then, Australia has been an economic masterpiece and a striking example for the entire world. Its rapid development had brought Australia to be the country with the highest average wealth per person in 2018, overtaking Switzerland. Among its many achievements, Australia was ranked 5th by the 2017 Index of Economic Freedom. Australia is the world's 14th largest economy and has the 10th highest nominal GDP per capita in excess of $55,000. In 2017, the country was ranked 3rd in the Human Development Index of the United Nations. Overall, Australia's economy has never experienced a recession for the last 3 decades, a unique case amongst developed economies. Australia's outstanding growth has been achieved also thanks to the rise of China as an economic superpower and its need of raw materials and minerals. China, by far the world's largest manufacturer of goods, is hungry for minerals and found Australia, a country extremely rich in natural resources such as iron, gold, uranium, and many more, to be a perfect business partner to satisfy China's needs. As a result, economic ties between China and Australia have grown by leaps and bounds over recent decades, and the year 2007 represents a milestone for both countries. China became Australia's first trading partner. Under these circumstances, Australia has become a global export powerhouse. Australia is the world's largest exporter of coal, iron ore, lead, diamonds, rutile, zinc, and zirconium. Second largest of gold and uranium, as well as 3rd largest of aluminium. Mineral exports account for approximately 35% of all Australia's exports. Economic partnership between China and Australia is not limited just to minerals. Agricultural and livestock exports from Australia also play an important role. While a large portion of these exports include cattle and sheep, exports of wheat and barley have also grown steadily over the years. Notwithstanding that agricultural and livestock export accounts only for less than 5% of the total export of Australia, the estimated value of such trade sits at approximately $14.5 billion. It comes as no surprise that the Chinese government recently decided to impose tariffs on agricultural and livestock products imported from Australia. Based on the numbers mentioned above, Australian export to China accounts for more than 40% of the total value of Australian exports. In other words, Australia approximately exports to China the same value of goods which are exported every year to Japan, the United States, South Korea, Singapore and India combined. In addition to trade, the business relationship between China and Australia also includes tourism, which accounts for 3% of the total GDP of Australia. More than 1.3 million Chinese tourists visit Australia every year, representing the 2nd highest number of visitors by nationality, equal to 15% of the total international arrivals. Chinese visitors are also by far the most profitable ones for the tourism industry of Australia, accounting for more than $8 billion in revenue. Those numbers are incredible if we consider that only 0.1% of the total population of China visits Australia every year, compared to 29% of the population of New Zealand, or 7.8% of Singaporeans. Chinese tourists represent a massive revenue stream for the Australian tourism sector, and many have yet to travel abroad. Other than raw material exports, trade in general and tourism, there is another factor which makes Australia and China particularly close: education. Every year, Australian universities are flooded with students from China. There were more than 260,000 Chinese student enrolments in Australia in 2019, with approximately 160,000 enrolled in the higher education sector alone. This represents almost 40% of the total number of international students, which is also twice the number of the second most represented student nationality, Indians. This mass of Chinese students injects more than $25.5 billion annually into the Australian economy. The University of Sydney alone, one of the highest-ranked Australian universities, received 1/5 of its total annual revenue from Chinese students, amounting to more than $500 million. Despite the beautiful picture painted by numbers, the relationship between China and Australia is increasingly complicated. In recent years, we have seen tension rising between the two countries, with bitter statements made by both sides. And the reason is simple. Even if both countries complement each other economically, the liberal Australia and the oppressive Chinese Communist Party struggle to get along from a political perspective. The very first incident occurred in 2008, when Kevin Rudd, then Prime Minister of Australia, during an official speech at the Peking University, commented on the delicate relationship between China and Tibet. Those are the words which have not been digested by the Chinese Communist Party. Some have called for a boycott of the Beijing Olympics because of recent problems in Tibet. As I said in London on Sunday, I do not agree. I believe the Olympics are important for China's continuing engagement with the world. Australia, like most other countries, recognises China's sovereignty over Tibet. But we also believe it is necessary to recognise there are significant human rights problems in Tibet. The current situation in Tibet is of concern to Australians. We recognise the need for all parties to avoid violence and find a solution through dialogue. As a long-standing friend of China, I intend to have a straightforward discussion with China's leaders on this. Nevertheless, the relationship between China and Australia continued to rise until a free trade agreement signed in 2015 seemed to commence a new decade of trading and investments between the two countries. In addition, Australia decided to be a party to the China-backed Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. This move upset several politicians in Washington, especially when Australia seemed to describe the United States as a security partner and China as a strategic business partner. Another blow that weakened the US-Australia relationship happened when the port of Darwin was leased for 99 years to a Chinese conglomerate with ties to the Chinese Communist Party and People's Liberation Army. The port was a strategic infrastructure used also by the US Army to deploy thousands of Marines every year. President Obama, unaware of the inked deal, expressed his disappointment and perplexity to the Australian counterparty during an international conference in Manila. After the election of Mr. Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister of Australia in 2015, the relationship between China and Australia deteriorated rapidly. A prominent Chinese businessman in Australia was found to provide substantial donations to political parties. Allegedly, those donations were given on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party to exercise influence on the political landscape of Australia. The senator involved in these unclear money transfers resigned from office in 2018. In 2019, authorities in Australia decided to revoke the permanent residency of the said Chinese businessman and proceeded to commence corruption investigations. This scandal makes us recall of a warning issued by the former Chinese ambassador to Australia in 2005, when he mentioned that the Chinese Communist Party can rely on a network of 1,000 informants, combining a structured effort to infiltrate Australia in a significant way. The relationship collapsed in 2018 when the Australian government, first country amongst the Five Eyes intelligence sharing alliance, decided to ban Huawei and ZTE, both Chinese multinationals, from deploying its 5G network in Australia. This stance represented, on the one hand, a clearly hostile act against Chinese interests in Australia, and on the other hand, a full realignment with American policies. Nowadays, if this is even possible, the Sino-Australian relationship has deteriorated even more rapidly. The Chinese Communist Party is inviting Chinese students to boycott Australian universities after several Chinese students have been targeted by local Australian students in several incidents involving pro-democratic Hong Kong rallies held in Australia. Anti-Chinese sentiment has grown also in local communities, where racist episodes happen regularly. Last June 2020, the Australian government has proposed an international investigation to clarify the responsibility of China in relation to the global COVID-19 pandemic. This stance has led to immediate retaliation by Beijing, which has immediately imposed tariffs on certain Australian goods, including livestock exports. Based on recent developments, it is unclear how the two countries could de-escalate tension and re-establish good relations between themselves. We are afraid not only that this palpable tension may last for the next years, but also it may completely collapse into some sort of China-Australia Cold War. And the question remains, will Australia manage to untangle from China's preeminent role in Australia's economy without suffering a massive loss? Hope you enjoyed this one. See you next week. In the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe below and turn on your alerts. See you soon.